Okay, let's go on to discuss the semantics of TFL. We will describe the meanings of TFL sentences by describing the conditions under which they are true. Now, this basic strategy rests on two assumptions. Our first assumption is that TFL is a truth functional language. That means that the truth value of a complex sentence is determined by the truth values of its component sentences. We will understand how that works better in just a couple of minutes. Now, secondly, we assume that every sentence is either true or false, but not both. So, for example, if you have a negated sentence, not A, this sentence is true if and only if A is false. And if A is true, not A is false. Here we see that the complex sentence, not A, is true or false depending on the truth value of the embedded sentence A. And that's just what it means, that the truth value of not A is a function of the truth value of A. Furthermore, the conjunction A and B is true if and only if both conjuncts A and B are true. And again, we see that the truth value of the complex sentence A and B is determined by the truth values of the two embedded sentences A and B. The disjunction A or B is true if and only if either the first disjunct or the second disjunct B is true. Now this definition of the meaning of the disjunction is a little tricky because of an important distinction between the so-called inclusive and the so-called exclusive or. A sentence built using the inclusive or is true if at least one of the two disjuncts is true, and possibly both. So in TFL, the disjunction A or B symbolizes the inclusive or, and it is true if at least one of A or B, or possibly both, are true. So even in a case when both A and B are true, the disjunction A or B is true. In ordinary English, the word or often expresses the exclusive or. A sentence built using the exclusive or is true if exactly one of the two disjuncts is true, but not both. So for example, English sentences expressing permissions typically use the exclusive or. For example, if I tell you, you may have cookies or ice cream, that is naturally understood as me allowing you to take one of the two, but not both. Or if you go to a restaurant and they offer either salad or soup as the appetizer, it is usually understood that you can't take both the salad and the soup. So if you look at a TFL disjunction A or B, it's always important to keep in mind that this disjunction expresses the inclusive or and is true even in cases where both A and B are true. Let's talk about conditionals. In the conditional sentence, if A then B, we call A the antecedent of the conditional and B the consequent of the conditional. And this conditional, if A then B, is true if and only if either the antecedent A is false or else the consequent B is true. Now, the TFL conditional, represented by the arrow, is called the material conditional. And it is important to notice that in many English sentences, the words if blank then blank do not in fact express the material conditional. So here's an example. If Mitt Romney had won the 2012 election, then he would have turned into a helium-filled balloon and floated away in the night sky. This sentence is false. And it is false even though the antecedent is also false. Mitt Romney did not win the 2012 election. So if this whole sentence expressed the material conditional, and given the truth conditions that we have defined for the material conditional, then this sentence should be true, but it is not. And so that means that it does not express the material conditional. So why do we interpret the conditional in the way that we interpret it? Well, the basic point is that the material conditional is the best that we can do to symbolize if-then in TFL, given that TFL is a truth functional language. To capture the meaning of all English conditionals, we would need to construct a language with richer resources and add further clauses and symbols to it. So the material conditional is the best that we can do in TFL as a truth functional language to capture the meaning of if-then. And in order to capture all uses of if-then in English, we may need additional resources that we do not possess in TFL. Finally, let's talk about the biconditional. The biconditional A if and only if B is true if and only if either both A and B are true or both A and B are false. In other words, the biconditional is true just in case the two sentences flanking the biconditional have the same truth value. It's important to distinguish between biconditional sentences and necessarily equivalent sentences. Let's start by talking about a biconditional. The sentence, Joe Biden is the 46th US president if and only if Kamala Harris is the 49th US vice president, is true given that both sentences flanking the biconditional have the same truth value. They are both true. However, the two sentences, Joe Biden is the 46th US president and Kamala Harris is the 49th US vice president, are not necessarily equivalent, as we saw earlier in this lecture. There are possible scenarios in which only one of the sentences is true and the other one is false. So the upshot here is that A if and only if B says only that A and B in fact have the same truth value. This biconditional sentence does not say that these two sentences must have the same truth value. So a biconditional sentence, A if and only if B, can be true even in cases where A and B are not necessarily equivalent. All that's required is that they have in fact the same truth value. Okay, that was it about the semantics of TFL. Next, we are going to go on to discuss how we can symbolize English sentences in TFL using TFL sentences.